This will be very, very interesting. Gen Z protests are spreading around the world. Here's why, by Warfronts. Interesting, by the way. See, my belief as to why this is happening is because the Zoomers had enough. Gen Z had enough. The problem is that we have, okay, like, us as, like, Zoomers. We cannot afford a house. We can barely afford, like, an apartment, groceries. We cannot afford a family. I think people just are having enough. I mean, Nepal is a great example right now, right? I mean, quitting is also, like, a sign of that happening, right? People just doing the bare minimum for, like, work and stuff because it's not worth it. We've seen what happens.
They say we are a TikTok generation, a generation of idiots. And when we rise up, they don't let us speak out about the country's problems. When a Malagasy protester said those words to DW, she captured the raw frustration of an entire generation disillusioned with their government. And it's not just in Madagascar, where the youth, angry at runaway corruption, economic uncertainty, or a host of other issues, have taken to the streets in protest. In Nepal, demonstrations against a social media ban quickly turned into a wholesale revolution. In Kenya, they rallied against an unpopular finance bill and police brutality. And in Ladakh, they agitated for greater constitutional safeguards and statehood from India, which has governed the region federally since 20.
Yeah, people are also done with, like, the freedom being taken away. People are really, really done with that as well, right? The social media ban is just, like, one of the few things, right? But in general, people are really done. Young people are really done with, like, our freedom being limited. Understandably so.
19. In Madagascar, however, the protests were caused by something most people would take for granted: access to water and electricity. Madagascar is one of Africa's poorest nations, with about 80% of its population living on less than $2.15 a day. The government...
That's crazy. What could you get for €2 here? Let's say let's equalize that. What could you get for €2? Oh, two packages of instant noodles. You could get that. Yeah, 2 packages of instant noodles. Pretty much, yeah.
Recently implemented rolling cuts, which left millions in the dark and without water. In the capital, Antananarivo, these cuts meant that people could be without essential services for more than 12 hours, making the country's already precarious situation a lot more precarious. The government's response followed a familiar playbook: heavy-handed force, curfews, tear gas, and mass detentions. When that quite predictably did not work, President Andry Rajoelina announced that he was dissolving the government. Even this dramatic gesture has failed to assuage public anger. At the time of writing, protesters continue demanding his resignation, which, if it happens, would be quite ironic given that President Rajoelina first came to power through a wave of street protests that toppled his predecessor in 2009. But Madagascar is just one flashpoint in a wider wave of unrest that has stretched across the global south.
I didn't even know that was going on in Madagascar. See, that's how little there is reports on these things happening. And I mean, there's a reason. It's a bit of more than raising the voice to protest. It's a revolution, obviously. Yeah, you could call it that. Yeah, I'd say it really is. If it, like, it makes sense why they're not really, what's the word? Any media coverage, right? Like, I've not heard that this is happening in Madagascar, right? I've not heard that. So it's really interesting to hear that, because I guess the media doesn't cover these things. I mean, if I look at it, the German media hasn't even covered anything about Nepal that much. Like, not really. No, actually, no, not really. Barely, maybe, a little bit. Interesting. I guess there's a reason for that. You know, I'm schizoing here right now. The reason why they're not covering these protests is because so it doesn't give other people the idea who aren't protesting, who would have the power to protest, the idea that they could do the same
this year. And because that wave seems to already be rolling on across Morocco, Peru, and other nations, now seems like the perfect time to ask, well, what's driving it? Where's it going to go next? And what does it mean for the global south?
And now a quick word from our sponsor, me, or more precisely, my website, fronts.co. Have you ever found yourself thinking, you know,
there's just not enough content on Warfront. 6 videos a week is just not enough for me. I want the world to be crazier. I want more war, more death. Well, 1, oh, what's wrong with you? And 2,
well, something would be definitely that wouldn't happen. I mean, I'm particularly interested in that.
Well, great news. Extra Warfronts content is now at your fingertips over at fronts.co. Look at that. Look at that. Yes, starting this very week, we'll be posting 2 exclusive videos every week to our new subscriber-only website, fronts.co. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to brand new Warfronts content that won't be available on YouTube. Our first videos are already up, exploring topics as timely as whether Poland could win a war against Russia, and as timeless as how South...
Is it Poland's time? No, thank you. No more wars in Europe. We good.
Korea came to build the best tank on Earth, and to sweeten the deal, we're also asking our writers to contribute 2 in-depth written articles each week, exploring some unusual or less appreciated angle on geopolitics and warfare. So, not only will you get more of the videos you love, you'll also get a chance to read some of our writers' unfiltered takes on war news. So look, if you like this channel, you'll love fronts.co. Again, $5 a month. It helps support us here at Fronts, Warfronts, Political Fronts, and Fronts.co. And nothing is changing here. I've learned from the mistakes of past YouTubers. We are not doing a paywall on any existing content. The 6 videos a week will be here for you just as before. It's all just gravy, baby! Don't know why I went all Austin Powers there. But, yeah, Fronts.co. Just go there. Good domain, right? It was expensive. Now, perhaps the single most important factor driving these protests is demographics. Countries across the global south are experiencing a youth bulge, a phenomenon where a large share of the population is comprised of children and young adults. According to Justin Lin, former chief economist of the World Bank.
Yep, that is... See, the reason why this is not happening really in Europe as much, right, is also that we don't have really a large portion of young people here because, well, either people, my generation here in the West at least, don't like the people that make the Zoomers, either don't really have that many children, or well, 28% of our generation got how's the word eradicated in the womb. They experienced the womb nuke.
The youth bulge commonly happens in developing countries after the state successfully reduces infant mortality rates while mothers still maintain a high fertility rate. In theory, a youth bulge should be a good thing. As more young people enter the workforce, the country's dependency ratio, that is, the ratio of the non-working age population to the working age population, will decline. If these young people can be fully employed in productive activities, the country's economy should boom. Given all the demographic doomerism in places like Europe and the United States, this seems like a pretty good problem to have. But there are potential downsides.
The problem is that if you have the problem is you can make many children, right? But if you don't have the amount of workplaces to fit those later adults in, then you kind of have a problem. The way I see it, right? There's a bit. If you have like a lot of children, but you don't have a lot of workplaces, then where gonna put all these people? How are you gonna feed all these people? So yeah, it's like really rough.
If all of those young people can't find employment, a situation that is becoming increasingly common.
There, he's talking about it, right? It's an employment issue. It's an employment issue. Absolutely. I'm proud of Gen Z protests. For some areas, yeah, for sure. All Gen Z, or some of them are Gen Alpha and Millennials. It's probably also like, and these protests are also probably a few like Millennials as well. Definitely. I'd say so too.
Across the world, then it tends to no longer be the economy that goes boom, but the entire nation. Exacerbating the unemployment issue is the fact that more young people than ever before are getting access to higher education. However, a degree no longer guarantees a job, let alone a stable career, because these economies have not grown fast enough to absorb the influx of graduates. Not to state the obvious, but this is a really big problem. Santosh, a young man from Nepal, put it this way. There is a big problem with jobs here. Even after getting a degree, people don't find work, so they have to go abroad. And those that do only earn 100 to 150 euros a month. That's not enough to live on. According to Dr. Richard W. Frank, a senior lecturer at the Australian National University, this disconnect between expectation and reality can push youth towards more radical forms of dissent. He warns that young people who can't secure employment have a lower opportunity cost for engaging in risky behavior. When they don't feel like they have a stake in the system, they become more willing to challenge it, sometimes violently so. Now, this is also true of much of the West, where the number of people holding degrees has far outstripped the number of well-paid graduate jobs. But what makes these grievances even more pronounced in countries like Morocco, Peru, or Madagascar is how visible economic inequality has begun. And not just
Obviously, imagine if it happens in North Korea one day. I mean, I think that it won't happen in North Korea, but what will happen is probably that, there's two options. That man is either gonna open the floodgates, or they're just gonna disappear out of not making babies. That's really what it is. Right? They struggle with not just economic issues, but also they're not making children. So they're gonna essentially die out eventually. I'm not proud. The kids, they have to protest, in my opinion, before they had an opinion. But if a good change comes of it, with me and my opinion, true. We'll have to see, right? We haven't seen. It hasn't been going on for long enough to get a what's the word? Get a good look and get like a right. We haven't seen much of it yet because it hasn't been like that long when these things happen, right? We haven't seen that in like essentially like a field test. We haven't seen how that experiment goes. That's the word I'm looking for. They can. Yep. Sound of protest will start. Police will start. Make people disappear. Yep. Exactly. 1997 Gen Z or millennials. I think it's 1995 to 2012, if I'm not wrong. Yep, I think that should be the case. It's either 1995 to 2012 or 2010. One of the two.
Just inequality, but also rampant elite corruption. In Nepal, while ordinary citizens were trying to make ends meet, Sagar Thapa, the son of politician Bindu Thapa, posted a picture of himself in front of a Christmas tree made of over 30 luxury gift boxes from brands like Cartier, Louis Vuitton, and Gucci. This angered the youth so much that they took to social media using the hashtags #NepoKids and #NepoBabies to criticize what they
Nepo kids and Nepo babies. I mean, yeah, that's very much a Nepo kid / Nepo baby, for sure. I was born in 2009, which means I'm Gen Z, yes. And I googled, it's 1995 to 2010. That's the Zoomers.
Saw as the extravagance of a corrupt class shielded from the daily struggles faced by the average Nepali. In Kenya, while the government was preaching austerity to try and curb the country's debt crisis, President William Ruto and his close ally, Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen, were seen wearing designer shirts and watches worth thousands of dollars. In Indonesia, parliamentarians voted to give themselves a monthly housing allowance of 50 million rupiah, that's approximately $3,000, in addition to their salaries, a sum almost 10 times the Jakarta.
Yep. It is interesting, right? This is all happening these places. It should happen in Europe. I mean, it's already happening in the way, right? The UK, it is happening. There is some issues happening in France as well. It is happening. Though I think the reasons are fairly different. See, the problem is that also, at least for Africa, the issue is that a lot of African countries are socialist with a corrupt government. Obviously, that's not gonna fly. That's gonna have a struggle. And the people that have pulled up, that essentially are good leaders that have appeared in Africa, have been taken out in no time, and that's an issue. How is everyone doing today? I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. It's tourist's birthday. I'm gonna people tell. If you say like that, you want people to tell that it is your birthday.
Minimum wage. The backlash isn't just about the opulence being displayed by public officials and their families, though. It's about what those images represent in societies already weighed down by economic hardships. When leaders tell citizens to tighten their belts but are photographed in designer clothes or block public roads for hours to celebrate the wedding of a politician's daughter, the gap becomes pretty impossible to ignore. For young people struggling to simply survive, it is a blatant provocation. And it's here that we get to the key difference between the protests we're covering in this video and other recent protests that have taken place in countries like France and Britain. In the West, inequality and elite corruption can be enraging, but it is rare for governments to take decisions that could leave you literally unable to feed your family.
But we have seen similar things to the social media ban, in a way, right? The Child Online Safety Act, where essentially, right, we are at the point where, like, the government wants to do mass surveillance, right? And that's tough. That's tough. That's a rough thing. So, yeah, it is, at least when it comes to control that is happening. As like any other day, once you're 12 years old, like our birthday, we also have our own death days. Maybe it's our birthday, well, when you're closer to death. Well, fun fact, the first person, supposedly, to reach at least 150 years has already been born. So, who of us is it? It's gonna be me.
And then openly laugh about it. Never forget that one Indonesian MP who called those protesting against his exorbitant lifestyle, quote, the dumbest people in the world. This is why some countries, like China, have started cracking down on ostentatious displays of wealth, fearing the social unrest that they might trigger. But it's not just the inequality itself that's unique to this time period and these protests. No, there's also...
You can't show money in China. If you show money in China, right? You're gonna be like, jail, straight to jail. You drive a nice car, straight to jail. That's what it is.
Another factor, one that's become embedded in all our lives over the last 15 years or so, one that today is ubiquitous even in poor nations like Madagascar. We're talking, of course, about social media. Although the governments of the global south don't have the same tools to control the internet as China, they have still attempted to force it to do their bidding. The Kenyan government passed the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Bill, while in Indonesia the state has the Electronic Transaction and Information Law. Critics see both as attempts to stifle speech on social media. But we should be fair and point out that the governments insist they are necessary to safeguard national security. Laws like these, regardless of where they are passed, often underestimate the importance of the internet to young people. Quoting Dr. Nayana Prakash, a research fellow at Chatham House, there's been a sort of trivializing of what social media can mean to young people, both in this protest and across the world. Social media isn't just a way that we chat with our friends, it's a way that we feel connected to any kind of network in society, both locally and globally. Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with widespread access to the internet. And for them, it's more than just a source of entertainment and intriguing documentaries presented by knowledgeable bald men. It's a tool that they use to learn, connect with their communities. I am very bald. To connect with their communities and make a living and hold those in power.
Obviously, it's used to it's used for criticism. It's used for connecting with people. It's used for, like, right, the only proper way nowadays to plan things like protests is used online, and it disrupts that as well. It is used as a tool for freedom. And if you take that away, then people are obviously and understandably so going to be very, very mad.
Are accountable. Young people across the world have taken to posting content satirizing their governments whenever they feel unheard, mocking politicians through nicknames, memes, and parody videos. When satire fails to change things, internet platforms can quickly transform into protest headquarters.
Careful, creating a meme in the UK or Germany can end you up in jail. Don't meme the politicians. Don't meme the politicians. I beg of you. You're gonna go to jail.
Encrypted messaging apps like WhatsApp and Telegram become command centers for coordinating protesters, while social platforms like TikTok and Instagram turn into broadcast stations to live stream police brutality. Protesters in Kenya and Indonesia used these apps extensively when they recorded the deaths of Boniface Karuki and Afan Kuranawan at the hands of the police. Those videos became rallying cries that mobilized thousands more to take to the streets. More importantly, the internet allows ideas to spread, not just within countries, but all over the world. This is the key point that we really want to hammer home here. 2025 hasn't been a summer of youth protests just because governments this year have been particularly shitty. It's also because the images of protest from one nation can galvanize young people in another, or even give them practical advice. Protesters across the world now share ideas on everything.
It's also that with access to the internet, you can get financial support from others too. That really can't happen if you can't have access to the internet. So it's also funding that can be created through the internet. Of course they don't want that. It's not just advice, it's also resources. It literally is resources.
From mobilization to something as practical as how to handle tear gas. Nothing illustrates this global exchange better than the appearance of a flag from the anime One Piece at protests across the world, from Jakarta to
Isn't the One Piece flag banned in Indonesia, or am I wrong? I think it was the Indonesia. Could be wrong, but I think so.
Paris and Antananarivo. Dr. Subir Sinha, a scholar at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, told France 24 that the flag has been given new meaning by the protesters, elevating it from a cartoon emblem into a political symbol. Quoting him here, well, all of these movements basically have rallied around this anime figure, and they've given it a new meaning. That somehow this stands for freedom, it stands for liberty, it stands against corruption, it stands against the elite. The youth's collective anger at the system they see as only working for the elites, now represented by the flag of the Straw Hat Pirates, has allowed the protests to become, in Dr. Singha, his words, a contagion, or to use terminology better suited to the internet, a meme. However, the most important idea spreading across borders isn't a tactic or a symbol. It's the fundamental realization that governments are neither infallible nor invincible. Every live-streamed protest, every time a government building is breached, every time a government acquiesces to protesters' demands, it is proof that the status quo can be challenged. And that inspires copycats. There's a reason why so many of this year's protests have echoes of others, why Nepal's parliament went up in flames just as Kenya's did in 2024, why the homes of Nepali politicians were ransacked and burned as they had been in Indonesia just weeks earlier, why the protesters in Morocco have organized themselves in the same way as those in Madagascar or Peru. Yet copycat doesn't mean identical. Because while some have already started talking about an Asian Spring, the fact is...
An Asian Spring? Ha! Interesting. Yeah, there's things happening in these parts of the world. And I hope that Europe wakes up too. That
Nepal's revolution is an outlier. In most other nations hit by the Gen Z protests, governments are still standing, and in some, they've become even more entrenched. Although these protests share a common DNA, their outcomes have differed significantly depending on factors such as how the political elite reacts and how organized the youth are. Some have led to tangible political change, while others have fizzled out, underscoring the fact that copying a protest doesn't guarantee the same result. In Kenya, after sustained protests against the 2024 finance bill, President William Ruto withdrew it, conceding to one of the protesters' central demands. He went even further, dissolving his cabinet and promising major reforms. However, that's where the momentum stopped. Within weeks, he had reached out to the opposition to shore up his government through a coalition-type arrangement known as the broad-based government. Then he rehired many of his old ministers, and those he didn't retain were rewarded with cushy positions, often as ambassadors, to ensure their loyalty. And the finance bill? Well, according to National Assembly Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah, they quietly passed most of its provisions in December 2024, barely 5 months after the deadly protests. Kenya is a perfect example of what happens when the government has mastered the art of performative accountability. By acquiescing to some of the protesters' demands and
the art of perception. Yeah. Hey, maybe they should also get a few things taught by our government here in Germany, because ours do the exact same thing. They're very performative, and they mastered the art of deception. It is really interesting.
Instituting the bare minimum reforms possible, the government was buying time and goodwill, hoping that short attention spans and fatigue would eventually wear down the movement. And the strategy worked, as subsequent protests, including a wave this summer that turned deadly, have failed to reach the critical mass of June 2024 when the Parliament building was set alight. As such, the government has been able to implement its agenda unchallenged. Additionally, the Kenyan protests have exposed the limits of leaderless movements in sustaining long-term pressure. Without institution or structures, there was no mechanism to hold President Ruto accountable to his promises. Contrast this with Nepal, where demonstrators were able to oust former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli.
I mean, they literally burned the entire government to the ground and then voted for the new Prime Minister on frickin' Discord. Discord of all places. The leader of Nepal is a Discord mod. It is crazy.
The Nepalese protesters succeeded where Kenya's failed for one critical reason. The coalition government propping up Oli was already on the verge of collapse. Oli only became the prime minister after two of the largest parties in Nepal, the Nepali Congress and the Communist Party of Nepal, formed a coalition government. The two parties are historical rivals, and their ideologies are diametrically opposed. A coalition between the two was destined to fail, and cracks could be seen long before the first young person picked up an anime flag. After the protests, the Nepali Congress put out a statement urging Oli to take responsibility for the violence, signaling that the end was near. Nepalese youth took advantage of a fractured political class to not only remove an unpopular government, but to also get an interim government sympathetic to their cause appointed. And they haven't stopped there. Led by Sudan Garang, a 36-year-old former DJ and founder of the non-governmental organization Hami Nepal, the movement has begun the transition from street protest to electoral politics. In an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera's Start Here, Garang confirmed that he would be vying for elections and launching a political party to present a unified youth front in the upcoming March elections. Kenya and Nepal represent the two poles of possible outcomes for these youth-led movements. On the one hand, there's performative concessions meant to lessen
Yep. Interesting. So yeah, we got like well, both of them, like, they're not like, one is an extreme, right? Nepal is like an extreme, okay, and Kenya is like the middle ground. We're like, and then probably there's also like protests that like start and to just like get put down. The people just get put down like dogs.
Public anger while maintaining the status quo. On the other hand, there's radical change that reshapes a nation's entire political landscape. But predicting where a country ends up on this spectrum while protests are still happening is a pretty difficult task. Madagascar, for instance, seems to be leaning towards the Kenya model after the president dissolved the government but still retained his power. But this is geopolitics, where events
dissolves the government, still in power. Aren't those two straight up contradictory?
Can move rapidly in the 2 days between us recording this video and releasing it. By the time you're watching this on YouTube, Madagascar could well have a new president, which would push it firmly into the Nepal camp. It's a lot easier to place a country on the spectrum. With the benefit of hindsight, Indonesia tilts more towards the Kenyan model. According to Liam Gammon, a research fellow at the Australian National University, Indonesian protesters hit a brick wall of elite unity. This allowed the government to skate by with cosmetic changes like reducing lawmakers' benefits while ignoring most of the 17+8 demands, a set of short and long-term measures drawn up by activists to address their concerns. When the press asked Pabaya Sadiwa, the country's new finance minister, about these demands, he dismissed them as the complaints of the poor minority, saying, and we'll quote him here, "That's just the voice of a small part of our people. Maybe some feel disturbed that their lives are still lacking. If I create 6 to 7% economic growth, those demands will disappear automatically. People will be busy working and eating well instead of protesting."
Keep a population fed and distracted, and they will not care, right?
This response revealed a belief in Jakarta that economic growth alone could paper over the deep-seated grievances about inequality and corruption. Basically, the ruling class calculated that time and rising GDP figures would erode the protests faster than any genuine reform could. But not all governments can afford to play the waiting game. In 2022, Sri Lankan protesters forced out the long-ruling Rajapaksa family, which had worked to consolidate power and weaken checks on its rule. 2 years later, in 2024, the Bangladeshi youth toppled the government of Sheikh Hasina, who had dominated her nation for decades and turned increasingly authoritarian, proving that while the Nepal model is rare, it is not impossible. Then there are cases like Ladakh, which exist outside the Kenya and Nepal models. In these instances, the authorities calculate that they can simply crush dissent without any consequence. In Ladakh, the Indian government imposed curfews, shut down the internet, and detained dozens after a peaceful protest turned violent. Cases like this usually happen when protests are confined to small areas or when the community protesting has little ability to influence national elections. Ladakh is home to fewer than 300,000 people according to the last census, and in a nation of 1.4 billion, it represents less than 0.02% of India's population. Their concerns barely register in New Delhi, and for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, the cost of repression is negligible. A similar crushing of protest took place earlier this year in the Caucasus nation of Georgia, in that case because the oligarchs stayed in line while the government cracked down. If rumors are to be believed, the president of Serbia may be preparing to do the same. It's a reality that young people around the world will be considering as they weigh the decision to take their frustrations to the streets.
I think there's also like there is a, what's the word? There is a good time frame to also do this, right? There needs to be the right time to also do this. Obviously, optimally would be that if a government starts to go nuts, there should be immediate outrage and reaction to it, right? Immediate. That's usually not what happens, right? People are just too tolerable to, right? People are just too tolerable for that to work well. It's just doomed. Well, my own country doomed too. Oh yeah, Europe is doomed. Everyone is doomed. The world is doomed. Where are you from again? Yeah, the world is doomed. The world is absolutely doomed. Not gonna lie, true and real. But there cannot be any nihilism and negativity. Billions must try.
Okay, so the last time that we asked this question, when looking at why One Piece has become a global protest symbol, we predicted that the next wave of protests would hit Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Spain. To be clear, these were always only informed estimates, a product of us looking at the factors in Indonesia, Nepal, and Kenya and seeing where else might have a similar mix of potential triggers. Still, we managed to completely miss the nations with a similar mix that subsequently did erupt: Madagascar and Morocco. The latter of which has been caused by growing dissatisfaction with the vast sums being spent towards preparation for the 2030 World Cup, while the country's social services like education continue to be underfunded. The crystal ball that we often refer to, I'm afraid it's still not working. However, what was true then and still is true now is that protests like these are likely to blow up wherever the youth are pissed off at corruption and lack of opportunities. And as recent...
Come on, Europe! It's like, you know, like the meme of like the guy having like a stick and pointing at something and be like, go ahead, do something. That's like me in Europe. It's like, go ahead, do something. It's just stupid. You know, our government is corrupt. Our people, well, they got carried away. Obviously, yeah, as it was named here.
Events have proven that can be almost anywhere. So instead of asking which country will be next, let's look at what countries in the global south can do to preempt these protests, because while unexpected, they are not inevitable. According to Justin Lin, the former World Bank economist that we quoted earlier, the first and most obvious solution is job creation. Governments need to move beyond campaign rhetoric and actually create employment opportunities that match the qualifications of their educated youth. This means investing in industries that can absorb large numbers of workers, supporting entrepreneurship through accessible credit and reduced red tape, and partnering with the private sector to align educational curricula with market needs. But jobs alone aren't going to solve the problem. Governments must actively tackle corruption. And when we say actively, we really mean it. Launching performative anti-corruption campaigns that only target political opponents while your allies are building Christmas trees of Gucci boxes isn't going to cut it anymore.
Actively going after corruption means that you have to have laws in place also that make it impossible or really hard for corrupt governments to even get like a reach or anything, right? That's a problem. This like performative bullshit is just not working. Like, for example, our previous chancellor, prime minister, whatever you want to call that man, essentially, what's the word? Moved money from like Germany to Switzerland, and then said he lost the money. He lost the bank account in Switzerland. Obviously, nobody believes in that, and we don't know where that money is. He probably has it. Like, stuff like that is just like crazy. It's just like crazy that like nobody goes after these people. And then obviously in those parts it's even worse. Obviously in those parts it's even worse. Yes. In 2010 to 2014 or so in my country, we had the biggest protest here. We got nothing from it. The government ended up dismiss it. Yeah, usual thing. That's why I'm saying petitions are useless. Oh, a petition with like 3 million people signing it, and it's like these governments just look at it and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, we acknowledge it. Oh no, anyways, let's move on.
This is already happening in Nepal, where Om Prakash Aral, Prime Minister Karki's choice for Home Minister, announced that all the corruption cases that had been stopped because of political influence would be reopened. Finally, governments need to create official channels for young people to voice their concerns. And here's the crucial bit: they need to actually fucking listen to them. And look, we're just YouTubers. We can't guarantee that governments will prevent all protests by following our advice. But we can say with absolute certainty that ignoring these issues is only going to make things worse. And 2025 seems to be a year in which protests are the new big thing among the youth. Bigger than Labubu's, bigger even than the Infinity Castle movie. Only the coming months will tell whether the trend has already peaked or if there are more sequels to come.
I believe this is just the beginning. I mean, there is a reason. So first of all, we have a big gap, right? We have like, first of all, men and women going completely different directions politically. We see more and more men also like straight up just voting for the right, obviously. Makes sense. Because one side is like, right, that's also why I think that's mostly really like our way of protesting. I like in like the Western world, in like Japan and all that, all those other places, right? It's like you vote for the right instead of protests, in hopes that it would get better. Now, does it get better? We don't know, because when I look at Italy, it didn't really solve too many problems. It probably won't do much in Japan. It probably won't do much here, but hey, they're at least trying. Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting. It's just interesting. And that's only the things you heard, Poke. The ugliest corruption is under our knowledge. Obviously. That's the stuff that's like public, right? But we don't know like the scheming that happens like far behind the scenes, right? That just doesn't happen, right? We will never know. Saddest part, Uber driver is not even a part of the protest. He got lost in the middle of the crowd and just trying to find the way out. Crazy. That's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is just the beginning. This is just the start of this happening, and we'll see what happens. And not gonna lie, I'm excited for it for a little bit. Of course, I don't want violent protests to happen, right? Oftentimes, there's no other way, right? Because the other side is violent, obviously. But obviously, I don't want lives lost. I think that if there's corrupt people, they should be obviously have a due process and be put in jail for what they're doing. But yeah, that's rough. That's rough. Anyways, like, comment, and subscribe.